Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this June 6th, 2016 day on our calendar. I'm your host, Greg Anthony. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. You can catch my show every evening from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. That's on FirstAmendmentRadio.com Pacific Time. If you can't catch the show then, go to my show at 11 a.m. Pacific Time at First Amendment. And if you can't listen to those shows, boy, it's your fault, not mine, because we really get disappointed when you don't listen to our show. And we pass this show along by word of mouth. The major networks, of course, don't carry this, and they consider it to be completely a conspiracy theory. Well, let me tell you, it isn't. And I'm going to explain a little bit about that, get into what I want to do today. Like I said, go to my website if you don't believe me, at arcticbeacon.com. It's a website I've had on for over 10 years. I come from the mainstream media, was a print journalist for many years. After college, wanted to get into the mainstream, thinking that that's where you could get the truth. You can't get the truth. You get a spin. You get everything but the truth when you start working for there. And I learned the hard lesson. Learned the lesson the hard way because I believed that was the way to do it. And I found out the newspapers are corrupt as hell. I found it out when I worked in Rome, paper I worked for there, as well as I did some reporting for UPI and some other private places, but I worked at the American newspaper, and I found that place was controlled by the CIA. Interesting story. And if you go to Bomb Blast at American newspaper in 1982 Rome, you'll find that I was almost killed in a terrorist attack there. During the time I was there during the 80s, not only was there the huge Vatican, huge, as Larry David would say, Vatican scandal. I wish he'd used that word huge when he talked about Vatican corruption, but he doesn't get there either, and he's a Jew. But he makes millions of dollars in Hollywood, and he knows if he touches that subject, he is done. But anyway, I was there during the huge scandal of the Vatican Bank and started to learn the crazy stuff that they do and how they control. And behind the scenes, basically a satanic Luciferian organization working together with governments around the world to basically bring about a one world order, one world religion, one world government. Our leaders have said it many times. You know, George H. Bush, old Daddy Bush, mentioned that in 1991, and many other of our leaders have always talked about this new world order. Well, behind the scenes, you don't believe what's going on. And in Rome, I found out not only were they corrupt, as far as money laundering during the Vatican Bank, that goes on today, drug smuggling, the whole shot, genocide, the whole shot, they worship Satan right in that building. And there's things called the Black Mass where they actually do child sacrificing, and I talked to people that would verify that, for fear of their life. But when you're in Rome, you learn a few things, and you learn one thing, that this stuff doesn't get over here. This information never gets here. So we have this whole American population falling prey to what's going on in the political world. We play this left-right paradigm. Every one of these guys worships the Pope. You would not believe it. Now let's and there I could go on and on and on with this, but I think it's a good introduction for what I plan to do this week. I can't do it tomorrow because I planned an interview regarding with Mark Grennan, again with this Cure MMS. He's in Colombia, and I want to do another show on it because I know a lot of people have been emailing me and wondering, how to use it, where to get it, is it a good remedy, blah, blah, blah. So I want to have Mark on again tomorrow, but all the other days, I'm going to concentrate on two people. I'm going to concentrate on the illegal jailing and the persecution of Pastor Tony Alamo and the Alamo Christian Ministry, which I've done for 10 years. But you know how many, it goes in one ear and out the other of a lot of people. What I was most disturbed about when now Tony this ministry has been persecuted for years, but when what hit the fan back in 2008, even the last of the few, now there's a couple guys on this radio network that realized what he's done, but other people around that were supporting him just hightail it out of town. They left. They just didn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole because they realized. Now any pastor outside of some of the real good ones, like some of the people that I've had on my show who will back him. No one comes out publicly about this. And so I wanted to concentrate this week on these two people. Well, the other guy's Daniel Smith. Now, he's in jail for selling MMS. And when you see how they have screwed up his life and basically lie, they basically lie to get these guys in jail. We have more people in jail per capita than any country in the world. And let me tell you this, why I want to do this story. Most of you don't know this, but when I was working as a journalist, even before I realized what the hell was going on, I was a feature writer in Michigan and also in Florida, and I would concentrate on a lot of times finding stories where most people wouldn't dare to tread. And a couple of stories that come to mind is I was working through an attorney who turned me on to this story about a guy who'd been sentenced to murder. He was an ex-boxer, and this is interesting because everybody's talking about the death of Muhammad Ali, and I'll touch on that in a minute. Because I did have an opportunity to meet Muhammad Ali, interview him in Rome in I believe it was 1980 or 81, somewhere in there. There was a sports conference, and he came to speak. And so I got to know him a bit. And I'll mention something about that in a second. But first of all, so I'm doing a story about this guy, an ex-boxer from Detroit, who was jailed for 22 years, and he was finally getting out of jail as new evidence came. This is before DNA and all this the more high-tech stuff came in. And they finally found evidence that he was jailed illegally, framed by the district attorney, etc., spent 22 years in jail. And the day he got out, I did his story prior to him getting out, and then the day he got out, we met in Detroit, and I did an interview with him. And amazingly, he was one of the people that have been falsely accused. So it's not, and I just, at that point in my life, and I was a young journalist, about 24 years old, I was thinking, how many more people are in there? This wasn't a black guy. It wasn't race-oriented. This was a white ex-boxer who got caught up in a scandal, and he was the fall guy because the prosecutor needed to find somebody. Maybe he was running for district attorney or something, and he needed a nice, clean, oh, hey, I put people in jail, I should be your prosecutor. But how many, that made me think, how many of these people go to jail and are sitting there right now that don't belong there? We know that there's some, so I don't, so I ended up getting a law degree after I came back from Rome, and I got disillusioned with the newspaper work, things like that. And who wouldn't when you find out that the paper you worked for in Rome was owned by the CIA and they almost blew you up? I mean, that's going to change your attitude about, and people ask me, why don't you work for CNN, or why don't you do a traditional radio program? I go, how could you do that? After they almost kill you, and you find out the truth about all their scandals in Rome. You see it comes from the Pope. You understand you're a former Catholic. You're BS'd your whole life. And people ask me why I do this. I mean, well, you know what? That should explain it. But anyway, I wondered how many people go to jail like that don't belong there. And it's disheartening. So don't believe the system all the time. Don't believe the mass media. Don't believe the majority. And take the old quote from, I think Twain said it first. It's a great quote. Now what is it now? You can't do wrong if you do what's right. You're never wrong if you do what's right. And so live by that. It's pretty good. But how many do you think our government lives? Oh my goodness, when the Vatican, it's just a pile of lies from the beginning to the end. And here we go. So I wanted to mention that. So as I was in law school, when I went to law school, that was in the back of my mind all the time. And they don't teach you anything about the important things. It's an amazing study. It's a great exercise in the mind, keeps your mind active, and I think by using your mind, you keep it active throughout the years, and hopefully, that'll continue until the day I have to leave this place. But the point I'm trying to make is, during law school, I took on a project. It was interesting because there was a 3 strikes law passed a number of years prior to that. Remember that there was a girl killed by somebody who'd committed a felony, then got out of jail. And so and I can't remember the name of the law. No, I can't think of it. But anyway, they passed the 3 strikes law. And what that meant was, on the 3rd strike, if you got put away for your third felony, you're spending life in jail. But you don't realize they didn't delineate the felonies. Now, a felony could be stealing something as minor as food or drug crime, marijuana. So you had these people in jail. I met this woman that was in jail for 15 years. She had 2 kids, and her 3 felonies were 2 were drug related to marijuana, which if she was now living, I guess, in Colorado, she'd be okay. Go figure. And the other one was she stole some tools because her husband was out of work, and she went into the store and she had to steal a bunch of tools, and the amount of the tools was a felony. So she was going to she had life in jail. When I met her, she was getting petitioning to get out, and she'd already been in jail for almost 14 years. Amazing. So I started looking into this 3 strikes law, and it's incredible the number of people that were put away for things they shouldn't be. And so when I took on the Tony Alamo story, I first took it on because not only does it have, is it really a tragedy that Tony sits in jail? He's in his 80s. He's blind. If you look at his life, they've been trying to persecute this ministry since the 60s. And I checked the best I could to look at every aspect of this case. And I realized quickly that once you get into it, you're going to look on the internet, you're going to look everywhere, and many people don't even want to touch it because, they were set up from the beginning. They have been persecuted from the beginning because of their stance regarding the Vatican. They weren't afraid to pull punches on that. And also this idea of Bible Christians. It's a dying breed, and that is because the Jesuit order has infiltrated and turned Protestantism into nothing but Catholicism. So besides Tony being in jail for 175 years, and when you see, I've went through each aspect of the trial, then basically looking at how they only found, now listen to this, usually when you do, and I've covered a lot of cases of sexual abuse, when you look at the cases in the Vatican, for example, there is a history. I mean, there's thousands of people that come forward. Look at Bill Cosby, for example. Now, when the first girl came out, there were like 50 others that followed. Now, Tony has been around for 40 years, since the 60s, and throughout this period of time, they've raided him numbers of times. They put him in jail for phony IRS charges. We've gone over that. So this is an orchestrated effort to silence a ministry that was successful, because Tony wasn't just your typical, boring preacher. He was one that decided, look, I'm going to spread the word of God, but I'm also going to do things here. I'm going to help people. I'm going to build businesses so people can work for the Lord, not work for the man. And boy, that incensed him when he was very, very successful. He had certain businesses. He came from a background in Hollywood. And so, boy, when you look at him, it's easy to see how they can just distort this story. And I've watched it over the years and knew that you're not going to get any of the truth on the mainstream media. I even criticized once. I was looking for everything because I always looked at all the negative things they were saying, because I realized I'd met the people there. I'd talked to the people. I saw how, now what I was getting at throughout all the years, finally they got him on what was called, they had to use the Mann Act, and we've talked about that. They couldn't just say, hey, straight child abuse, rape, and all that, because it never happened. And they could only find 4 or 5 girls in 40 or 50 years. There wasn't a flood of people that came back and said, this guy sexually abused me. In fact, with the people that testified, the girls that they found that testified, they were bribed. They ended up basically... you get a few disgruntled people going into an open door ministry that, basically says, listen, we follow the word of God here. And sometimes that's not easy to follow. So you're going to understand. I would expect hundreds, thousands of people coming forward and saying, hey, look, this guy is that. But it wasn't that way. And the 4 or 5 girls that testified against him, they had to use the Mann Act, which is an old law That means it was the government passed this law basically to stop prostitution, stop sex trafficking across state lines. So basically, if a pimp had an intent to take girls across state line for sex, they could use that, even though they didn't have to find actual sexual abuse. Now, in fact, in the Alamo trial, these girls testified, but there was never any abuse or sex abuse ever shown. There was never an act. For example, he did not do any, in the trial, there was no evidence that he committed any sexual act. There was evidence that these girls hopped in a bus and they were all going he had ministries all over, one in California, another in Arkansas, and they'd cross state lines in their bus to go to rallies, to go to different things, to spiritual events, things like that. And so they knew they had to get them on some kind of technicality, and if they could find a few people they could turn, and we went over all the testimony of those people and saw how they decided to turn these people, how they sent them to a place called Wellspring, which is basically a place where they can brainwash these kids. And these were girls that, they weren't like 10 years old, 9 years old, stuff like that. These were 4 or 5 girls they found, and basically what happened, when the jury went to deliberate, and I can get into during the week, I can go over really in-depth this stuff. Well, we've done it before on other shows, so if you're really interested, go to my website and look up all these shows, and you'll see that everything I'm talking about here, I've gone in depth on, and did it in a sense using some of my legal background, as a defense attorney would do, looking at the legal documents and stuff. But there's more to a case than just the legal documents. And so what I found was, one of the most interesting things in this case was what the jury did. When the jury goes to deliberate, the judge gives instructions. And when the jury's a bit confused, they come back and they ask the judge a question. So the jury sent a little note to the bailiff, hey, we need to clarify something. So they call the jury in, and the foreman says, listen, can we still convict Tony Alamo if we have found that there is no sexual abuse being shown here in the trial? So figure this out. If the jury says there's no sexual abuse found, and the judge would have said, well, if there's no sexual abuse found, then there's no crime. No, you can't. So he'd have walked. Even though if you look at this case, the government infiltrators who testified on his behalf, not in court, they weren't allowed to testify. One testified on my show, how he was set up to bring Tony Alamo down in any way possible, eventually kill him if we can't find anything wrong. And the FBI investigator went back and said, hey, this guy's clean. And he ended up leaving the FBI because of this. He was not allowed to testify. And can you imagine if several other of these witnesses who weren't allowed to testify, who have given sworn statements that over the years, even back to the 70s and 80s, they were trying to infiltrate this church to bring it down. Imagine that would have just blown the case. So they had to figure out some way not to allow these people in to testify. That's why the case only lasted 10 days. I've been in court sometimes. I worked for a criminal attorney for a while, and we had an armed robbery case that wasn't even, as basically no one got hurt, and it lasted 25 days. And the guy ended up getting sentenced to like 7 years. So here you got a guy going for his life, and he spends they sentence him to 175 years, and the thing lasts 10 days. Ridiculous. Now, a lot of the people that could have testified on Tony's behalf weren't allowed to testify, and that should have been enough to turn it over in the appeal courts, but it never was. The judge just sat on it. And Tony just sits in jail to this day. Now, the judge at that point, when that jury asked that question, can we still convict if there was no sex abuse found? The judge said, just all I can tell you is read my instructions, and they went back. Came back with a guilty verdict. Okay, here's the deal. Just because they did that, if you see this trial, just because all of the media, and you go out, just because even these phony Protestant ministers won't come behind him. Then they set up websites that want to make him look like his ministry wasn't a Christian ministry. All of that is expected. So, looking at what they did to him, now these 4 or 5, what even adds, more insults to what went on here, insulting this man, this ministry, the whole shot, is that a number of these girls that even testified recanted afterwards. And you can look at some of my stories about that, and we can go over that again. Then there was the part about the stealing of the children. The state then took all these kids because they were supposedly in danger, and they took over 35 children. Many have not returned to their families to this day, kidnapping basically. And we went over that aspect of the case, showing how there was never any child abuse ever proven by the Child Services Department to take these kids. Then thirdly, they started to do civil cases to take away all his property. And in Arkansas, the biggest civil settlement in their history was rendered against this ministry, over 500, was it 500 million? So you can imagine some of these girls, maybe they wanted a few bucks. So they are bent on taking away all of their property. So besides putting this travesty of Tony being in jail, there's another issue here that's important, and it's why I latched onto it in the beginning. And that was, why are they Christianity is in danger here. And the reason I say that is we have people in this country who still believe Catholicism is Christianity, and you can go anywhere in the mainstream, and all these big guys like Bill Riley and all of these people, they always praise the Pope, and Catholicism is considered Christianity. It is not Christianity. We've shown that on this show many times. It is not. It is a perversion. It is a pagan religion, similar to the Muslim religion. And we've talked about how that could have been created by the Vatican. Now, I do not care if people worship either in the Muslim or the Christian faith, or in the Catholic faith. What I care about is they don't redo research to find out what their hierarchy is really all about. And if they did, they might have a different opinion about these two religions and maybe many others. I've never been a big fan of religion. But what I'm saying is, if you look at what's happening around the world, we do stories about what's going on in Nigeria. The huge millions of Christian population there are being surrounded, probably set up for a genocide. How many people in the Orthodox Christian world have been slaughtered in Russia? Do you realize how many people, the Vatican has been trying to get rid of anybody that doesn't follow what the Pope wants, and even creates these other religions to create more strife. That's a stark possibility. And until our country realizes this and gets it straight, what they've done is they persecute people like Alamo, like others I've talked about who practice Bible-believing Christianity, and call them a cult, when in fact the Vatican, the Mormon religion, probably even, and I lump it all together, the Muslim religion, Islam, they're all cults, and they fit the definition much better than when you look at the Bible-believing Christian area. We'll be back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening. Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.
Okay, we're back for the second half hour of the Investigative Journal on this June 6, 2016, 3/6 is in there. This day that they're beginning, guess what they're beginning in Oregon and Washington? That big training session for a big, huge, they got more military gear up there, and supposedly, 20 countries are taking part of this training session. What will happen if there's a 9.0 earthquake in the Cascadia subduction zone and a huge tsunami? So they're going over that for 4 days over there. 666 day for them. Okay, let's nix that right in the bud and say, hopefully, we're not going to see a big earthquake in the next couple days. Or in the near future up there. But they're up there training in case it happens. And somebody sent me a video, it was quite interesting, of all of the military vehicles headed that way on a train rail that was going through Mount Shasta area. And this went on for, 10 minutes. One vehicle after another on these flat cars. I mean, it was amazing. I'm going, what are they planning up there? But anyway, keep that in mind. Check it out for yourself. Talking about the Tony Alamo case, I will later in the week get into Daniel Smith, who's also been jailed illegally in this country. I mean, just a political prisoner in a certain sense. And he's into the health, into the natural cure area. And I'm telling you what, they come down so hard on these people that are trying to really get to natural cures for cancers and all these dangerous diseases that are being created as we speak by all the toxins in the air, by all the vaccinations, that people don't want to deal with the truth there. And it's just amazing. But we're talking about the Alamo case and all of the tentacles. Look, like I said in the beginning of the show, you can't understand this case if you don't understand what the Vatican is really about and what Catholicism really is. What made me want to, after I said I was going to do a show on Tony, I got this email from a guy, and I'll read a portion of it. And he said, "Hey, Greg, I heard that you're going to do be featuring Tony Alamo and Daniel Smith for the next week or two." Yes, that's right. I will be doing that. And I've heard prior shows on Tony. Good. And there's probably many more to go to. And I have a question. Where can I find objective information on the Alamo case? Now, okay, I'm going to try to answer that. Well, you can find it here. And you can find it in the court documents. You can find it in very few places on the internet and in the mainstream because they are not objective. And he says, I actively write a blog at thoughtsandscripture.wordpress.com. I went quickly to that. He seems like he's got a lot of good stuff there. I haven't read it thoroughly, but go ahead and look at it. And he says, I'm slowly starting up a YouTube channel under my name. Oh, another one. I mean, there's so many YouTube channels. That's all right. That's the way, I mean, people love YouTube, and you can get a lot out of that. I just don't like how YouTube will screen and also basically limit the number of people who go to your YouTube. Like maybe this guy here wants to talk about the truth of the Vatican and all this stuff. And my gripe with YouTube is they censor those. And I've told people, that are doing this, and I've checked it out. It's very few hits on the really important YouTubes made on this subject. So know what you're up against there, Jonathan. And basically, I like to do this show so that we don't talk to the choir. I like to stretch out the people who are getting this. And he said this at the end. He apparently said, if all of what you said about him is correct, more people need to expose what has happened. And I agree with him totally. Now, what I'm going to say to you is, it's not a question solely of correctness here, because we're talking about you're going to get one side of a story and another. All I've ever said is I would love this story to get a fair shake outside of on this show and a couple other smaller shows, and people that I talk to that agree with me on this subject. But it doesn't get a fair shake, just like when you try to expand the stories of the Vatican involved in the one world government, one world order, because this story that on the Alamos, the reason I do it is because it's a major issue about how they're persecuting Christianity and how the Vatican tries to play this game that they are Christians. They're not. And it goes a long way. Now, the reason that I can say this and not can be considered a hater of Islam, like I say to the Vatican, when I first started doing these stories, they would try this thing on me and they'd say, oh, he's a Catholic basher. And I had to explain, no, it's not. All of the millions that follow Catholicism, I don't really have anything against them outside of wanting to get them out of it, because I was one. I know what they do to you. And I can imagine if you grew up in Islam, it's the same thing. And I've talked to people from Islam who want people to get out of that too. Now, that leads me into Muhammad Ali. Now, Muhammad Ali was first called Cassius Clay, and maybe many of you weren't even around when he fought under that name. And don't get me wrong, I met Muhammad Ali in 1980 or 81 in Rome. I did a story about him when he came for a sports conference. It was quite easy to get a story right then. I knew where there's only a couple of hotels he'd be in, so I called his room. I believe his wife Veronica answered, and I said, hey, this is Greg. I'm from the newspaper here. We'd like to do a story. I'm from Chicago. Muhammad spends a lot of time there. In fact, that's his adopted hometown, him being born in Louisville, because he did spend a lot of time in Chicago. And she said, sure. So Muhammad was on the phone in the next minute, and there you go. Next day, I was in his hotel room about 9 in the morning. There he was, laying on the bed, in his sweats watching cartoons or something on TV, and he said, "Oh God, I can't understand a word these Italians are saying." And he laughed and he looked at me and he said, "Hey Greg, every time I get up in the morning, sorry to bother you with this, but it cost me about 10 grand for all my entourage and stuff." He says, "I got to cut down, man. I'm not the champ anymore, and I got to cut this out." So that began an interview I did with him and found him to be great fun. He was more interested in what I was doing in Rome than me interested in what he was doing there, and the interview just went as if you'd know Muhammad Ali. Very funny, a very nice man. I have nothing against him. We didn't touch on Islam. We didn't touch on anything like that. But the point I'm trying to make is him, and then there was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who used to be called Lou Alcindor. So you had a couple big sports guys turning over, joining the Muslim faith. Now that's fine. I have nothing against it. What I do have is, even though they're going to make a big deal about, I believe the big deal about Muhammad Ali is that he stood up against the war in a time when it wasn't popular. And he told the truth. He said, he said very simply, I have nothing against those people over there. And for religious purposes and for my convictions, I'm not going. So he sacrificed his title, 3 or 4 years of his boxing career. And he was proved right that war was a travesty. And if everybody would have done that, we wouldn't have had a war. Because they wouldn't have had any boots on the ground. And I wouldn't have lost 3 or 4 good friends over there. So for those things, I respect him. Now, as far as his choice of being a Muslim or a Catholic or a Mormon, that's up to you. And I have nothing against people that make that choice. I'm just saying, do your homework. And if I would have known then what I know now, I can say this in all honesty. I remember, having met him and watching his plight of Parkinson's disease and all this stuff. During the time, I would always say this to anyone, whether it's Muhammad Ali or whether it's someone you never met that's a member of Islam, or someone very, Matt, I don't know if he's a Catholic, he acts like one, but let's say a high-level Catholic, like Joe Biden or whatever. Do you really know what your hierarchy is about in history? Do you really understand it? Do you really understand, if you're a Muslim, what it's about? And if you're a Mormon, do you understand what it's about? And you Shriners out there, walking around with your fez hats, worshiping Allah, really. Do you really know? Do you know what it's all about at the higher levels? And do you want to face the truth, or are you hiding something? Okay? That's what I'm getting at. So I can't be criticized from the Muslims. I can't be criticized from the Catholics. If all I'm saying to you is you have the right to choose. That's what this country is about. But you also have a responsibility to understand and listen to all stories about what happened in your history. That's where this show comes into play. We can present information that's relevant, factual, that's been hidden. Why can't it be given a fair shake unless there's an agenda? And the agenda, my friends, is very evident here. The powers that be, these Luciferian powers that be, have decided to pit Islam against Christianity, lump in the Vatican there. They don't care, but the point is, the Vatican is not Christianity. And you will see how, if you really look deep, how they control it all. And mix it up for us people here. Mix up the fact that Catholics are Christian. This is really important. And this goes back way, way back to the Vatican's intentions to control the Holy Land, the whole shot. Now you're seeing all these Syrians being flooded in. They want that land for, there's something going on there, and we're playing right into the hands of it. 1 million refugees of Syrians have been taken in Germany alone, changing the culture there. And America is now being criticized for only bringing in 2,500, and Obama wants 10,000 more. And there's a big stink about, well, how are we going to control terrorism? We don't know who these people are. Well, we're going to vet them out. That word vet Once the political thing starts vetting, they vet, just say, look, I want to do a thorough background check on the vice presidential candidate, or I want to do a thorough background check. I want to get rid of that word vetting. I can't stand it. But America is now being criticized for not taking in enough refugees. And to me, it's just another powder keg. There's going to be more terrorism, more orchestrated terrorism based on this conflict. Now, I think whether you're Muhammad Ali or whether you're Joe Biden, whoever you are, Catholic, Muslim, Mormon, you have a responsibility to understand a lot of history, a lot of what's going on today, and the reason the mainstream is there, the reason the alternative media is there, is to control this aspect of the story. That's one of the reasons why I do the Alamo story, because it shows you, plain and simple, one ministry that has been attacked since the 60s for two reasons. One, well, actually three. One, they basically were Bible believers. Two, they weren't afraid to pass out literature, millions of pieces of literature all over the world about the Vatican corruption. And three, they were successful. Yeah, that's what. And they had to end this. It's the last of the Mohicans, so to speak, in this country. You're seeing, where are you going to practice Christianity anymore? You think you're going to go to some Protestant church? Last time I went to a church, my brother took me on Christmas to one of these supposed, I don't know what it was. It was a church in an industrial complex. They took over a big warehouse. And everybody from this area of L.A. these are kind of wealthy people up there. And they're all flocking in there. It was a non-denominational, supposedly Christian church. My goodness. I walked in there, it was like going into a concert. And the whole thing was pomp and all these, all this stuff going on. At the end, the pastor gave out the old hook 'em horn, gave out the old devil signal there, two fingers, and told everybody real quickly who he really is. So that's what's happening to Protestantism. It's pretty simple once you study it. And my point is, the reason they won't put this show, or I don't care if it's me, I really could care less, but they won't put this story on because it gets to the truth. They can't have it. It is credible. There's so much information we've done over the years and others that should be out there. Bill Hughes' information. Oh, God, a couple of ex-Catholic priests that I interviewed. How about Sister Charlotte? How about another girl? What's her name? Sister Carrie, who I did years ago, and she's still being persecuted. And I was supposedly to do a show this week on her, but I forgot about it because of this, and I will get to her next week. And her story that I did 7 years ago, I didn't even know what happened to her, but it's incredible what's going on with her. And she was a Catholic nun that came out to tell the truth. And there's many others. But unless people really get to this, they're not going to get it. They're not going to get it at all. And the Vatican and the government is doing a great job in making sure that they don't. And the media works right together with them. And that is why I do this. So in the last, 10 minutes or so, I wanted to look quickly. There's a lot of people I interviewed regarding the Alamo case, and some of them were infiltrators, people hired by the government, to in fact infiltrate the ministry to bring them down. One in particular, you can go back to many of my shows. In fact, if I called him up tomorrow, he'd come on. And down the line, I'll bring him on. A guy named John Peeler, who told the most incredible story about how he was hired. He was an FBI informant for years. And his assignment was to finally get some dirt on the Alamo ministry. And when he couldn't, went back to he gave out the names of his, higher up employers and all of his bosses, guys in the FBI. He gave it all out, but he found they even wanted to bump him off in the end, bump Tony off in the end, and he couldn't do it. And so he quit the FBI, and he went through hell over that. Came on my show. He recanted that. He told the truth. He apologized to Tony. And his story was so credible that the FBI had to go to lengths to basically put his son in jail for a phony murder charge. He was in the Army, his son. And when John, he was going to keep quiet for a while, but when he realized the FBI wasn't going to help his son in any way, he began to talk again. So he came on my show again. And then he apologized to Tony, and the information is credible. Now, do you think this might have helped Tony in his trial? Why, of course. But I remember when the trial went on, John Peeler was told he was going to be in the trial, being allowed to testify, but he never was. And I must say that there had to be collusion with the defense, working with the prosecution. He didn't get a fair trial. That's just one person. Now, I have a number of other people several other informants who I've got their testimony, and I've only got 6 minutes, so I probably can't. Maybe I'll read that tomorrow. They're sworn affidavits who they weren't allowed to testify on his behalf. And there had to be collusion between the prosecution and the defense where he didn't get a fair trial. Now, one reason is, why would they even? I mean, there had to be a change of venue in this case, because the people he couldn't get a fair jury in that town, in that area, in the place in Arkansas where they brought him to trial. I mean, I remember right after, even before his trial, when he was arrested, but he was still in jail. I figured I had me and a few other people. We called almost all of these businesses in that little town of Falk, Arkansas, to get their opinion about the Alamo ministry. And with over 40 to 50 phone calls we made to businesses and things, saying we're just wanting to know, you've heard about the Alamo, and every one of them said they were a cult, just repeated what they heard in the media. So how was he going to get a fair trial there? That's just another point. But when you look at the people that weren't allowed to testify, to give him a chance, this was a setup from the beginning. Not only was it a setup on the raid, because the raid occurred in 2008. Now, there had been a similar one back, I think it was in the 80s sometimes, where they raided them. And they probably did a couple in between there that I haven't even talked about. But looking at this case as a whole, you have to, outside of the basic facts, and I've delineated all of them, first by looking at the ministry, looking at what was said back by the mainstream media about this ministry, then personally checking out what they have done, meeting these people, seeing what they have done over the years, and putting that information side by side to what the mainstream. Now, that was never done in the mainstream media. Never did they really look behind the scenes and see what these people were really about. I did. And I've had communications with them. I've met them. And listen, over the years, I've been one of the few people that have talked about this story. And do you think that there's been one person that contacted me that stated, oh, I was abused by Tony Alamo? No, not one. And that's very odd, because I've been involved in other stories. I mean, I've done stories in other cases, and you would not believe the people that'll come forward once the story gets out. Okay, one girl is raped, then the next one comes out, the next one, the next one, the next one. This didn't happen. I got not many people. Oh, you get some people slandering him, of course. Oh, he was a jerk. I hated the Alamo ministry. These people were too authoritarian. Well, they're just saying, Tony, even basic, if you listen to the shows he did with me, he said, listen, we can't have fornication and all this stuff going on our ministry grounds and stealing. And this is and how do you teach people that when he had an open door policy? That is the amazing thing about this ministry. There's still to this day, you can go there, get a free meal. Anybody's allowed in. And can you imagine doing this in the 60s when they started out on Hollywood Boulevard? And you know what was going on with the drug culture then. After Operation Gladio was in full swing and the government and the Vatican, everybody were making fortunes off the drugs they were bringing in from Burma, and figured out a way to fund their wars through this and then getting everybody high in America. Well, Tony took up a cause to help these drug addicts, to get them off of it. Can you imagine the kind of problems that's, even the fake people that are going to come into that on top of all the infiltrators when the word got out that he was trying to do something good? It was amazing he lasted this long. And to me, it's still amazing that this ministry is still there. I mean, they're getting a lot of hits on their website, 300,000, 400,000 a week. They continue to pass out literature all over the world. In fact, I get emails from people in Africa who are being tortured by being involved with the Alamo ministry, talking about the Vatican, being put in jail there, being put in jail. A couple in South America contacted me that were getting this literature and trying to get the truth out there regarding, from Tony's literature. And these pastors there trying to spread the truth who are being persecuted there. So this is not something that should be taken lightly. And if you really want to get an objective view, you got to understand the behind-the-scenes reason behind this and who is behind it and their end game. Their end game is never forget this, a one-world religion, a one-world government. And they got to wipe out people like the Alamo ministry to get there. Back tomorrow on the Investigative Journal, I'll continue with this, get this show spread out, send it to everybody. Good night. Thanks for listening.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the left behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.